What is up, everybody? My name is Umar Farooq. I am a student of social work here at the University of Northern Iowa. I am sitting down to have a conversation with Ras Smith about the current status of mental health in Iowa and how we can tackle it on the macro scale. Thank you, Ras, for your time. Thank you for joining us. For my people back in Jersey, we don't know who you are. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, man. My name is Ras Smith. I'm a state representative here in Waterloo, representing my hometown. I'm born and raised here, and I don't really come from politics, honestly. My background is in direct service, whether that be through the juvenile court system or most recently a nonprofit organization that I now consult for, but providing wraparound services, family support services, social work services for students in our public school district. And so that really led me to run for office. I found a gap. Our institutions were failing students. We weren't addressing the needs, and we're reacting. And so for me, it's a privilege to be able to represent my community in the Iowa House, but bring lived experience to the work that we do. Yeah. Oftentimes, we forget the stories of people, and that's really the work. That's really the work.
For sure. So when it comes to the nonprofit work you were doing and you see this gap in the political world, what made you want to jump into that gap rather than continuing the ongoing work you were doing with nonprofit?
A lot of it for me, man, was really trying another avenue. I feel like being born and raised here in this community really demonstrated the gaps that existed. So I'll kind of work it this way. When I first graduated college, I was a strength conditioning coach at East Waterloo. Love working with students, but I found myself preparing them for the basketball court, the volleyball court, the football field, when they really needed shoes, socks, clothes, right? And so I take that to the next level. My goal was, okay, I'm reactive. How can I get closer to the source? So I went from there to graduate school to work in direct service in the schools before they got to high school, and I was a strength coach. How can we remove some of those barriers to success? And doing so, I found myself still being reactive. In graduate school, I took a social policy class. And I still struggle with this. What dictates which? Right. Does the political realm dictate what's happening in society or vice versa? And I think in this moment, more uniquely than any other time, I think that there's a lot of gray area. Yeah. The political has had so much impact on the way that we interact socially with each other. But also the way we interact socially with each other has made gains politically. The murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis is the reason that we banned chokeholds here in Iowa. That social dynamic led for historical political change here in this state. But that political change has not trickled down to be societal change amongst the way that we do business with each other here in this state. That might as well have been a decade ago, not last year.
Wow. So that's like the perfect segue what this is all about. It's about mental health on the macro level, right? So in your own words, like, how do you feel like, what does change on a macro level, first of all, just even look like in the political world? Like, not even just mental health related.
Yeah, that is the question that's going to challenge most of our systems over time. For me, if we don't think that way, right, then we're not root causing.
For sure.
And oftentimes, we can't afford Band-Aids anymore. I mean, we have to be real about what our challenges are. We can't afford Band-Aids. We have to do the tough work of asking why like 3 times, right, to really figure out what's happening. And so for me, the macro is so impactful because right now we have mass trauma. We have mass exposure to so many things, whether it be gun violence, drug epidemics, anything, outside of COVID, even. We have mass undereducating of populations, right? And so how do you address those things on a large scale? One, it's more cost effective to do so, but prevention is always the main determiner of success. How can we build in some of these policies and principles early on? And so preventative measures is key. That's key. Right.
So I'm really glad you mentioned trauma because I think a lot of times when people think of trauma, they think about assault. There are very, very big experiences that shape the way your brain reacts to a lot of triggers for the rest of your life. But I think I appreciate more so now that in the mental health field, we are actually in the mainstream world, rather. We're popularizing the word trauma in other applications in ways that we're describing accumulative trauma, things that are slowly building one by one every single day. That's what the ACEs studies about, the adverse childhood experiences, where things that kids eventually become normalized to in their household is causing, but it initially starts causing this adrenaline rush, and then you start calming down, and then there's an adrenaline rush, and then you start burning out as an adult. how do you address that on a macro scale?
I think for me, and I think that part of my graduate studies, we're finding how do you utilize informal educational practices in a formal school setting. How can I utilize non-traditional methodologies to have an impact in our traditional institutions, right? Because in American society, in most societies across the globe, most people go through your educational systems, right? They go through your incarceration systems. Those are like the two biggest catch-alls of populations in general. It's not preventative to get folks when they're incarcerated, right? So let's cross that one off the list. So where do we start? Most people go through a public education system in our country specifically, in the state of Iowa more uniquely. And so for me, prevention looks like, how do you adapt these services to the population that needs it the most in a way that's right there? They don't have to leave the school building. And in rural Iowa, I will say the struggle is, if I have to take my child to see their counselor, I'm going to have to drive 45 minutes into town, right? Wow. You got an hour at that appointment, 45 minutes back. That's half a day of work. Wow. Might take the whole day off. Where I'm from, a whole day off work means a bill's not getting paid, right? And so that's the reality for folks in rural Iowa. I think about my daughters here, because we talked about not normalizing trauma. I'll give 3 examples, and I know they're a little bit obscure, so bear with me, but it was probably 4.5 years ago. One of my students was shot and killed three houses down from where we are right now. Right? I remember running out of the house. I remember my wife taking my daughters, bringing them downstairs, down here. Me checking on my neighbor Vicky, me checking on my neighbor Dylan, and then seeing my student literally across the street. Okay, my daughter had explained to Maria what happened. I fast forward to another one of my students who used to eat dinner here, Cortez, being shot and killed. Me telling my daughter that Cortez wasn't going to come over for dinner anymore, this would happen, right? She cried, but Maria was 6 when this happened, right? So 4 years old, 6 years old. Last week, a man was shot and killed just down our alley, right? Just across the street from Arizona Street. Going to work that morning, okay, I didn't drive my daughters through the alley because we couldn't get out. The police had it taped off. It was that close. I drove through the back lot here, and my daughter goes, "Dad, you driving through the grass? Can't you see the police are right there?" Wow. In that 4 years, having a street blocked off has become normalized. She was less concerned about what happened, more concerned with, like, "Dad, can't you see the cops right there? Like, why are you driving through the grass?" Right? The baseline of what's normal has shifted drastically, dramatically. I'm seeing it in my 8-year-old, who, as a direct care provider, please believe I'm mindful, right? We don't do pies every day, but I check in to see how she's doing physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. For sure. I'm aware of ACEs. I know that the fact that we have a drill in our house when gunshots are fired, that's an ACEs. Her ACEs score is probably off the chart. Absolutely. With 2 college-educated parents with advanced degrees, right? But her ACEs score is high. Right. And so, for me, if that's her reality, given her parents, how do I address that for every student who doesn't have this privilege? And so, for me, it's early intervention in our public schools, because if my daughter continues to normalize this as okay behavior, what does that mean for her opportunity or her ability to address it, to want to do something about it? If it's normal, why would I change it? Why would I fight against this thing? And I think in this time frame that we exist in, man, I don't know if we can afford for not political reasons, not anything other than just our human value. How do we get past that if we're not willing to address it early on? First line of defense, our K-12 school system. That's got to be the first wave to address it. That's the front line. That's our front line. So that's the whole point of, like, preventing ACEs, because you as a parent, like, having both parents in the house, both being college educated, you can do everything you can to prevent trauma, but you can't be in control of your kid's outside bubble. Exactly. Right? And we were talking about this earlier, about how, for lack of a better way of putting it, a lot of areas in this country are benefiting and maybe even profiting off of the facilitation of a certain environment that is consisting of and sustaining the traumatic events that happen in these outside bubbles, and then kind of perpetuate trauma. How do you respond to that? I think for me, the hard part is, man, I've seen it. Before I was elected to office, before I finished graduate school, I worked for Farooq. Now, I was a part of our supervised community treatment program. So specifically, young men would come to my program after being released from Eldora, Woodward, Clarinda, right? So they'd be incarcerated in a juvenile prison for sometimes, 2 years. And they come to me at 15, 16, and my goal is to help them reintegrate into society. Oftentimes, though, the behavior patterns that we saw were, yes, sociopathic, but also they were survival, right? If it's ingrained to me, this fatalistic mindset, no matter what I do, I'm going to fail, right? The system is set up for me to fail because we have institutional barriers, right? No matter how hard you work, you're still going to be oftentimes a black person existing in this white space. And so that can be hard. No matter what I do, I'm not going to succeed. And so I think oftentimes we whatever it is real. But how we frame it, sometimes I got to just care about me to get through the next day. Because if I'm caring about you, I'm lacking. Right? And that's a hard place to be, but also that's the reality for so many people. If I don't have anybody but me, if I'm my own safety, if I can build in that consistency of you come at me, I'm coming back at you, or only caring about me, right? Then what else is there? I remember having a conversation with a gentleman in our community after he lost his mom and his brother to gun violence a few years back here in Waterloo. And we asked the question like, man, what about your little brother? He's like, I don't care about him. Like, I don't care about him. I carry a gun because I care about me. I don't care about him. And it's like, how do you respond to that when you're kind of forced into that position, right? Like that's what people feel like they have to do. I mean, for me, you have to value that's his truth. And that's the place you work from. Right. I don't get to discount that as your truth. That's your reality. Maybe I don't live in that space, but I'm dang sure not going to discount your reality. Right. You can't change your mind by saying, no, that's wrong. Exactly. Exactly. And I also have to be able to somehow empathize that this is survival. And that is his truth. And so how do you walk you back to a space where that truth is not dangerous or damaging for you or everybody else around you? And oftentimes we find ourselves in scenarios where we don't have the institutions or supports around available. Because it's all about timing. People are ready to make changes or acknowledge struggle like that. But if the supports aren't there, if I can't find you a bed or a space or a counselor to speak to in that moment when you're ready, and I may have missed the only opportunity. And so that's why having a variety, a plethora of services available is so key. But we miss that moment so often. I think with COVID, we're missing the moment. We're missing the moment. We don't have social workers in every single school. We don't have nurses. Our counselors, who I love, they work hard, man. But a counselor in the middle school and in high school, they're virtually schedulers and working on building out your college plan, right? They're not there to address. They're overworked. I mean, we got to think about it. When I was at Carver Academy, 2 great counselors, we had 450 students in a building where we have 100% free reduced lunch. Right? So like, the quality of the services diminishes at that point. Exactly. And the capacity to even provide services in a real manner, there's no fidelity to the model. So you can't replicate that either, you know? So I think that speaks to like the need of the non-traditional approaches you were talking about. What do those approaches look like? For me, any and everything. I don't think we have the privilege anymore of being able to dictate what is right for people. Whatever you use to connect is what you use to connect. If you sing, sing. If you dance, dance. You know what I'm saying? If you draw, draw. If you rap, do it. My soul. You know? But that's, I believe in that. We can't miss that space. I was a kid. I went to high school, man. It was band, PE, and advanced math physics. That's why I wanted to go to school every day. If you took those things away from me, you lost me. The same thing. If you connect because of music, we gotta get that pathway. Work with the person's value system. With the value system, right? But also be a box of crayons. Let everybody pick what works for them. For sure. Draw with your favorite one. So I assume like the challenge there then is like how do you have a macro approach to all that? You're talking about individualizing like treatment options and healing approaches and mental health services for what works for people. How do you address that on a macro level as a political figure? I think that's the beauty of it, is that it's, in my experience, it's actually easier to be more broad spectrum, right? I'm an avid hunter. I love to hunt. It's pheasant hunting season. I go out, and when I hunt pheasant, I use a broad array. Right. It sounds like an Iowa thing. I'm from Jersey. It's very much an Iowa thing, right? But I'm using I'm using a bunch of small pellets, right? I'm increasing my opportunity, my chances to get something. The same approach here, right? It's broad spectrum, so we're casting a broader net. If I'm really individualized, I'll miss somebody. Every clinical approach doesn't work. There are places here in Waterloo, just off of Broadway, where kids can go and walk and talk and literally stand beside a horse, right? Because horses will match your heartbeat. Oh, I didn't even know that. That's wild. It's wild, right? But like, there's different things that they can do because that works for some students.
Right.
They can go in there and talk to their counselor and have pets around. Some people it's plants.
For sure.
Whatever you do, though, we have to give people the opportunity to have variety.
Yeah.
If we're overly prescriptive, we'll miss so many people. Because what if that doesn't work for me?
Right.
And I think on the macro level, by doing so from a policy perspective, we open up opportunities for more people who have a different, diverse thought process. Sure. Hip hop literacy is a perfect example, right? Mm-hmm. Whoever would have thought that literally writing lyrics and raps and creating and producing music would be a caveat or an avenue for people to talk about brain health and mental health.
Well, even as an artist myself, like we see it all the time. A lot of rappers, a lot of artists in general talk about like, this is therapy to me. This is therapy to me. And it's time we quantify it into data.
Exactly. And I think that's the exciting part for me. When I give public speeches, man, I often will be like, I'm just gonna be transparent with y'all. This is like cathartic for me. Yeah. Like I'm doing it for me too, because to say these things publicly that I want to get out and let you know how I feel, that's therapeutic.
It's feeding
for me.
Your soul.
It's feeding my soul. And also there's something for me about the safety and predictability about you knowing where I'm coming from. Right. Because then I don't have to hide anything anymore. Right. I've put that weight back on you.
Absolutely.
And so I think as a policymaker in this state, I'm always looking to diversify how I can support people. Right. There's not a one size fits all. Right. And we're in a situation where, we gotta try everything.
Right. So can you speak into being a policymaker? Can you describe to me, what does that look like for you? Like, how do you be a policymaker to someone who isn't in the world of politics? Like, what does that look like for you in Waterloo in Iowa?
For me, it's evolved a bit over my 6 years doing it. I think I came in with the perspective of my voice always being representative of my community's voice. That's not always the case. I have different values. Like my community is not monolithic, like no community is. Yeah. And so I came in with this notion that I represent what East Waterloo always wants. Wow. Now I was always listening, but it's completely changed that narrative because it's how can I look at my community, juxtapose that with other communities across the state and find commonality now to make sure that I'm doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people across this state. And that's really been the evolution for me. And when it comes to access to care, that's our overlap, man. That's our space where whether it's the miles you got to travel to get there, whether maybe it is the venue that we use, right? Yeah. Whether it's schools, whether it's healthcare clinics, whether it's childcare venues, whatever it may be. Yeah. Those are things that are going to be extremely imperative to ensuring that people get the care that they need across the state.
Wow. So I want to use that as an opportunity to circle back to, we were just talking about these individualized approaches, but on a macro scale. What I understand, I have a very little understanding about the allocation of funding that was changed last year. I believe it was last year, a couple years ago, from Kim Reynolds. I imagine that this specific, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, this specific approach to mental health services, I imagine that it'd be very costly. Would it be? And how do you convince the people in general that, hey, this is something that's worth investing for our future? For preventative measures, for even people who are already affected by mental illness?
No, the first thing we have to do is explain to people and have the conversation about why it's important to you. Right? Because everybody got to have skin in the game.
Sure.
Across every demographic, young people who identify as LGBTQ+, folks who identify as persons of color, farmers, right, wealthy. We're seeing every demographic being impacted by increased suicide rates, right? And a lack of access to brain health or mental health services, no matter how much money you make. Yeah. And so that's a commonality.
That's something that we can't avoid anymore.
Can't avoid it anymore.
No side can avoid.
No side. And so then it becomes non-political. Yeah. That's our first key. That's right. Sure. That's the first hurdle to surpass in this fight. Yeah. Secondly, it's looking at how we really addressing the issue or we putting a Band-Aid on it. Last year, my hope was that we'd allocate more dollars. We didn't allocate more dollars. We moved the money from this pot to this pot, but we didn't change the amount of money. Right. And so we went from funding brain health services with local property taxes to funding it with the state general fund. My concern about the state general fund is that is dependent on income taxes for the year and if there's tax cuts. From what I've heard, if if we decide to cut taxes, get rid of state income tax, for instance, that's roughly $4.5 billion. Iowa usually runs an operating budget of just over $9 billion, maybe closer to $9.4 billion this year, roughly. If we take half of that away, what does that do to the dollars allocated for brain health services that we just shifted, right? We lose that. To lose half of the capacity of what we have to do now, that's terrible. I mean, the impact of that, I don't know how we quantify it.
Yeah.
You can't put a value on lives lost.
Absolutely not.
The folks who have to leave this state because they can't find services. The people who will fall through the gaps. I mean, in this moment right now, to me, that's treacherous.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, brain health services, to me, are right up there with clean drinking water.
Right.
Like, we have to have these things to serve our population.
It's a basic human need.
It's a basic need. And so to not address that, not really have a long-term vision, is just scary to me.
How do you respond to the people who are not convinced that that is a basic human need? Because you mentioned, like, this is something that cannot be politicized. Yeah. How do you respond to people who politicize that?
I think for me, it's less about contrasting them and asking folks to be reflective of their own stories. Right. Think about somebody else.
Everyone's involved.
Everyone's involved.
Who are against it.
Exactly. Yeah. If it hasn't touched you, it will.
Wow.
And if it doesn't, right, be thankful, but also be empathetic to the fact that somebody it has. And it probably is touching you, just haven't acknowledged it yet, right?
I think that's the reality. Right?
That's what ACEs is. It's normalizing the trauma. You have no idea. And sometimes people's defense mechanisms act like it doesn't exist. Right. And that's just as dangerous. That's just as dangerous.
Wow. So, like, continuing on, like, on the political level, I hear a lot ever since I got to Iowa. I'm still only 4 months here from Jersey. That in 2018 there was a strong push for mental health awareness on the state level, right? There was a push for, I don't know if it was like really more for destigmatization or more of a push for rehabilitation for substance abuse. But I heard even Kim Reynolds was behind that initiative. All these years after, has it benefited anybody? What is it looking like long term? Can you explain to me what was that push about? Where did it come from? What did all these things that people sign? What does it mean?
So we
for people who don't understand.
Yeah, as a legislature, we actually for the first time looked at ACEs and took that into consideration when it came to education and funding or creating a children's mental health structure.
Nice.
Right. We created the structure. We didn't put any dollars into it. Right. And so it's basically, I mean, it's monopoly money. Right. There's really no dollars allocated. And so we did things like make sure that we put like suicide hotlines on the back of school badges sometimes, or students do that. We created a hotline for students. But I struggle with it, man, because that's like half speak. It's a half loaf. Right. The real change comes from the state not pushing policies that cause trauma. Right. For instance, you can say we want to address ACEs. Yeah. But if the state is telling me you want to put a ban on transgender bathrooms, you're causing me trauma. Right. If you're a state and you say, I want to ban the 1619 curriculum that students of color can identify with and telling their story, you're causing more trauma. Right. If you're a lawmaker or somebody who's running for city council in Scott County and you stand up and say, I want North Scott High School to be all white, you're causing me trauma. Yeah. And so for the state to stand up and say, we're going to do some things to address trauma, but then be the perpetuator of mass trauma. Wow. It doesn't land. It's hollow. It's empty because actions mean something. The policy, the words on paper, don't mean anything because human subjectivity matters. Wow. And to see the legislature going back, last year we passed a plan for a perfect union which banned chokeholds. They came back this year with Back the Blue that made it okay to run over people with their car if they were peacefully gathering. Right. And so those things that we're saying we're going to address, right? We're not being self-reflective. We're not looking at the person in the mirror and saying, what are we doing to cause this as a state entity? This mental health thing is genuinely a holistic approach. It's a holistic approach. And uniquely, and I don't want to speak hyperbole, but I will say this. In a state where it's harder to vote, we're undereducating our population. We have a lot of hurt people who are hurt because we're not providing services. Right. We're making it easier to get a weapon. That's a recipe for disaster in my mind. Yeah. It's a recipe for disaster. And so if the state is stoking those fires and not addressing some of those basic needs of people, that's a scary place to be. Yeah. And for anybody running for leadership, regardless of running for governor or elected official or superintendent, before we pledge allegiance to anything else, no flag, no political party, no religion, human beings first.
Yeah.
Take care of human beings first. And we've forgotten those formidable steps, right? Before you can sprint, you gotta crawl.
Right.
We've forgotten that we gotta crawl first. We can learn to walk, and then we can run. We stepped into running. We're going the wrong direction. I think fast.
Right.
And that's concerning to me because it's hard to turn corners at high speed.
Do you think there's going to be a point if we're continuing to move at the rate that we are in the direction that we are? Do you think there's going to be a point where it's too late, or do you think there's hope?
I think there's always hope.
Okay.
I think there's always hope because if not, I couldn't do the work that I want to do every day.
Yeah.
I think there has to be hope and optimism in everything that we do.
Right.
But that's rooted in reality.
Right.
I think the sense of urgency is why I have hope. I think because we see the dire state of where we are. We see the condition of people.
Right.
The condition of everything feels hard.
Yeah.
Nobody feels like they can win right now.
Even the people on either side. You just mentioned like people who have to drive 40 minutes just to get their child some mental health services. Like this, it really does involve everybody.
Everybody.
And so like when you're talking about these individuals who can most definitely benefit, the ones who need to take that 40-minute drive to get mental health services, and it takes a whole payday out of their workday. And also they are feeling internally conflicted about having their tax money go to mental health services when it also has that holistic approach, making sure these mental health services protect those who are traumatized by being banned from going to the bathroom that they want to go to. How do you approach these individuals who would much rather let their mental health diminish because they don't want their tax money going to this holistic approach? What do you say to them?
But I think the first thing is helping folks understand that we're all connected and it impacts all of us somehow.
Yeah.
Right. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who isn't connected or impacted one way or another.
Yeah.
But if not, I think it's also about finding those commonalities, understanding that none of us are going to be able to escape the impacts of mental health and brain health, and it's not even about sacrificing your value system so much, right? This is a collective. As human beings, first and foremost, this is a basic need. And so before our allegiances to any political party, to any religion, it's got to be to each other first.
Right.
And that's key. And it's not always easy, right? Because not everybody's going to participate. We can't expect them to. But what we can do is provide services in an array that attracts people. I think that's the key. Whether you're a farmer in this state, whether you're somebody who identifies as LGBTQ plus, a person of color, whatever it may be, right? Traumas impact your life somehow. And so having availability to services in a way that you want to be served is so important to people. Yeah.
And it's like you were saying earlier, it's like a lot of our tax money goes into areas that we don't necessarily involve ourselves in. Like, our money goes into the public transportation system, and we don't. Not all of us take the bus.
Exactly.
It can be as simple as that.
It's a public good. It should be as simple as that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, like you said, I don't ride the bus, but I still pay taxes for public transit.
Right. It's like depoliticizing this. It doesn't have to be political.
But our goal, our leadership, have to mimic things that demonstrate that we care about the greater good. Sure. And that's always a charge. It's also always a challenge. For me, it's one of the reasons why I ran for office. Yeah.
So that goes right into the next question. So how long has it been again since Iowa has seen a Democratic governor?
Man, it's been. We're talking about the Tom Vilsack, Chet Covert year, so it's been over a decade.
Wow. And has it ever had a black Democrat before?
Never.
Right. So what about this area attracts you to go in and make a change representing not only black Americans of Iowa, but everybody? What inspires you?
For me, it's the commonality.
Yeah.
For me, I get to be a farmer, a hunter, a counselor, a coach, a husband, a father, and a black man. Yeah. And all those things make me Iowa.
Yes.
And to me, that's the reason why I'm excited to run for office and run for governor. Is that commonality. Those are the things that unite us.
Yeah.
But the role of governor has to be finding solutions to our common struggles. Right. And right now, access to brain health is a common struggle no matter who you are, where you are in the state. But I would also say that this place has shown me that whether I'm talking about my family's strawberry farm in Grundy County where we're struggling with drought because of climate change, or we're having conversations about the fact that AR-15s aren't what I'm concerned about when we talk about gun violence, right? It's the 12-year-old on a bicycle with a pistol that concerns me. Yeah. Those are our common struggles that we have to address. Wow. And so for me, being able to bridge that gap, not just from lived experiences, but from professional and political, to bring people together to tackle these challenges, that's what exists in this moment.
Do you see some pushback to that in the political world, to your approach?
Definitely so. I think we always will. It's different. It's new, right? Yeah. People are always fearful of things that we've never tried before. Absolutely. But for me, I'm not really down to keep trying things that have caused us to fail. I don't believe in that.
That's what perpetuates the aces,
man. That's what perpetuates the aces, exactly. So if we're not willing to be bold enough to try a different approach that I would say is different, but the data would show it's really our only path forward.
For sure.
To really address the challenges ahead of us, we have to be willing to innovate. And innovation doesn't always look complicated. Sometimes it's getting back to the most humane thing, providing basic needs. Sometimes it's being able to look past ourselves and be inclusive. And that's what I believe. And that's what my lived experiences at Iowa has taught me. Community matters.
Right. Absolutely. So how do you think people will respond to a black Democrat running for a governor in the upcoming year when they haven't seen that before? How have people responded, or how do you think people will respond to you?
I oftentimes get asked the question, like, do you think because you're black men people will vote for you? And I like to push back on people and say, well, would you not vote for me because I am black? Right? Like, nobody, you're asking me that question.
Yeah, it's projected.
It's projected.
An intention on it, right.
And I think it forces people to reflect on that. But I've been a black person in Iowa my entire life. And so
you're as Iowan as it gets.
As Iowan as it gets, and it has impacted my decision making because I think through the lens of a black man, a black man who's a farmer, a black man who understands that water quality in my community is a big deal because parts of East Waterloo were built on toxic dump sites, right? Understanding that civil rights and labor movement are so connected that when my dad was on the picket line in 1986. Understanding the significance that John Deere strike had, and John Deere as a whole, had on home ownership in Northeast Waterloo for people who were following the Great Migration, right? Like, that significance informs my ability to fight for labor rights and inclusivity. To say that I want nobody excluded from a bathroom because my family knows what that's like, right? Those are the things that inform my decisions. So I'm able to, I feel as though I'm able to collectively or advocate for people from a perspective of empathy, right? I'm in an interracial marriage. Me and my wife, talking about race is common practice in our household. Dang near every day, because it impacts everything that we do. And so it's a continual educational experience, and having that lens in this moment in leadership, I believe we have to have those things that aren't, you can't just read about them in a book, you got to live it.
Normalizing those conversations is what exactly can reduce these traumas on a macro scale.
And having leadership that's willing to dive into those conversations, it's so impactful. My daughter, I remember leaving a Black Lives Matter rally, and my oldest seeing the Black Lives Matter sign, looking at my wife and saying, "Mommy, you're white, does your life not matter?" And my wife being like, "No, it does, but right now it's important that people know that your life matters," right? Those are conversations that leadership has to have to demonstrate how we can have those, because we're losing that decorum amongst each other. The opportunity to have these conversations that are tough, they're difficult, but what good is working hard if you're not doing the hard work?
Right. Wow. That's incredible, man. So what do these next couple of upcoming months look like in preparation for the election for you?
Oh, yeah, man. Well, it's always a grind. Lots of conversations with folks, lots of roundtables, lots of hearing for me. There's a quote, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, the two are indistinguishable. People got to feel heard again. And if you're going to lead, you have to be able to hear. And so for me, I'm doing a lot of listening. And it's helping me to develop an inclusive vision, a collective vision of what Iowa looks like for the future. A lot of phone calls, a lot of raising money, but I'm really dug into hearing from people and empathizing with people, especially those who think differently than me. I'm open to that challenge. I want to know what makes up your psyche of what Iowa looks like in the future.
So when you're comparing to other Democratic candidates who have run before, what are you doing different that they haven't done and also that also speaks to voter turnout. I want to say, what can elect you? What is making you a valuable candidate? And will give people of Iowa to vote for you, right? What will give them a reason? Because, and my next question is about that, is about in the past, when people have represented the values that you're representing, do you feel that is voter turnout an issue, or is it people genuinely didn't believe in the things that those people were standing for, those candidates have stood for? And if it's the latter, people don't believe in those values, what are you going to do to help them believe you?
I think it's a combination of all those things.
Yeah.
I think you got to give people something to turn out for.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And if I'm not providing a vision that's bold enough, if my values aren't coming through as transparent based on my past work, then I'm depressing the vote.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a combination of those things. I'm running as governor, coming from a community where the average median home income is $39,000 a year. This is my reality.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the reality that, like, when people talk about shootings happening in your neighborhood, those are happening on the street that we're sitting on right now. This is my lived experience. But I'm also coming from the background of somebody who goes out to the farm and understands the impact of climate change on our ability to farm.
Wow.
On my ability to go hunt ducks and sit on the side of that bank and safely know I can send my dog in the water to retrieve a duck that I've shot.
Yeah.
I can't do that with confidence in a lot of Iowa's waterways, right? But I also think that we have to have a bold collective vision. For me, as a candidate, give people something to vote for. People will turn out if they got something to turn out for.
Absolutely. It goes to the value system.
It goes to the value system.
Yeah.
But if I'm just talk and there's no resume to back it up, I think people don't want to be bought into that fallacy. I truly believe that I've tried to demonstrate work that's willing to pull people together, whether it be, passing education or passing legislation to help different pathways for folks to get their GED in the state, whether it was deregulating so that my homeboy K. Burt can have a mobile barbershop, right?
Nice.
Or banning chokeholds and bringing law enforcement together with Black Lives Matter, with Democrats and Republicans, and saying, in this moment, we need Iowa to step up and show an example for us as a nation, for the nation. Exactly. That common ground. And it turns out the common ground was banning chokeholds, giving the Attorney General the opportunity to investigate police homicides, and saying, if you're a law enforcement officer who's got serious misconduct in your past, we're not going to hire you in the state of Iowa. That's common ground, right?
Wow.
If that's the case. Show me that's the new standard.
Nice.
Let's build off that and do the work now. So you can't tell me it's too hard.
Yeah.
We passed that after the murder of George Floyd, when racial tensions were high, political tensions were high. And so building off of that work, bringing people together is the resume that I'm trying to bring to this work. Saying that I fight for you. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's about getting rid of the partisanship in this thing.
Yes, it's like prioritizing. It's all of this. The stem of all of this is prioritizing basic human rights.
Basic human rights, and it doesn't exist for a long time.
Yeah, I'm
not naive about this moment uniquely. This moment is unique. People are in a vulnerable place, and vulnerability is good. It can be manipulated. Yeah, and for good or for bad. Donald Trump understood that, and I don't want to get overly political, but I think we're talking about strategy a little bit. Yeah. Donald Trump was able to utilize hatred and fear to prey on vulnerability. Yeah. I believe in utilizing hope and optimism. Wow. Yeah. To energize that same vulnerability to activation. You're basically being the human for the people of Iowa, because the reason what I mean by that is, like, I feel like a lot of mistrust in the political system comes from politicians acting like politicians, or just putting up a facade. But when I talk to you, I see that Iowan man you were just describing, right? And then it gives you the opportunity to utilize that hope. Oh, I appreciate that, man. It's mission driven for me. Yeah. It's mission driven work. If I wasn't elected, I'd be doing the same work. Yeah. And when I'm not elected, I'll be doing the same work. Wow. This doesn't change for me. When I first, found out about programs like hip hop and literacy, I was doing this work in the school district, connecting, trying to figure out how we could address these needs for people. Yes. We're just scaling the work collectively, and so for me, that's always been the issue with connecting to people, though, right? If real people aren't doing this work, how can their story be told? Who's missing from the conversation oftentimes? I'm not a Democrat from Des Moines who lives in a real fancy house with a whole lot of money. That's not who I am.
Right.
I'm proud of who I am. My family's worked hard for me to be where we are. Yeah. And so I want that to be the opportunity for most people. My dad was born on a sharecropping plantation, man. Worked for John Deere for 40 plus years.
Wow.
And now I'm running for governor.
Yeah.
Like that could be the Iowa story.
Yeah.
But it won't exist if we don't take action right now and make sure that opportunity still exists for people in the future.
Right. Man, I see so many like political campaign ads from the Midwest where like, my name is Tom Blake and I'm just like you driving a truck, and they're like, it's so performative.
It is.
And I feel like people aren't that dumb. They can sniff out the inauthenticity of it.
Yeah, exactly. But definitely can.
Wow. Like, and I think that's why, like, I think it's very admirable what you're doing, and I appreciate it at the very least. I don't know how much that means coming from born and raised Jersey, but I definitely see the value that you can bring. I think you mentioning hip-hop literacy, and you were also talking about giving a voice to the people who don't have one, connecting those two together. This is exactly what brought me here to you. I had the opportunity to sit down with some of the hip-hop literacy 319 kids. Yeah. And circling back to the value thing, I decided to, if you didn't already know, I make some music on the side. I bought them 2 sets of beats. And I told, there was 2 groups of kids. 2 of them were younger and 2 of them were older. I'm like, take these beats, pick one, and write about what you care about, right? And one of the beats was a little bit more uplifting, and the other one was a little darker, right? And the older kids took the darker beat. And, the reason why I asked them to write about what they cared about is because I think what you care about is exactly that segue, or that value system that we can use as a segue into tapping into the mental health. Because when I was their age, I was like, I am not getting a therapist. No. I don't see the value of it. I didn't trust them. Whatever reason there was, right? I had some bad experiences with counseling before in my life, right? So I use this method in order to speak about mental health with them on a direct level, right? Mm-hmm. And so 2 of the students, they took the darker beat, and they decided to start talking about the police brutality here in Waterloo, which I'm still unfamiliar with. I don't know the 100% full scope of it yet, but these are all predominantly Black young boys. Right, and even if they haven't experienced these issues with the police firsthand, they've seen it. They grew up with it. They grew up hearing about it. They heard about the murders, and we're seeing it on a large scale in the media, anyways. Exactly. Right. So these are all also facilitating ACEs, right? These are all perpetuating adverse childhood experiences. So I was talking to one of them one-on-one, and we were talking about the importance of letting this out. Being able to talk about it, denormalizing the trauma and normalizing the conversation around trauma. And we were talking about, like, what is it about making music that's therapeutic that you want to do that, but we can't talk about it to each other, right? And he had told me that I get to pick and choose what I want to write about. And if I'm talking to my homie, I get to pick and choose what I want to tell. But when it comes to mental health services, there was this overall sense that having to be overly open, it is a threatening stance for them. It's something that poses a threat for them, right? And then I asked them, what happens if you do overshare, right? Well, then I get judged, I get criticized, I get made fun of, right? And how would you feel if you get to overshare or just share everything about you and feel loved, feel accepted, feel like you can have a conversation? And then he told me, well, I don't want anybody just kissing up to me, right? I don't want anybody just not me oversharing and not getting any feedback from it. I'm like, why can't you have both? Why can't you be open and be loved and accepted and also have a conversation about how can we be better? How can we heal? Right. And over the years, that's what I learned therapy to be. These people are professionally trained, especially if we have a mental health system that is properly representative of all cultural diversities in this country. Right. These people are trained to talk about these things. And the answer was to that question, I don't know. Why can't we have both things. It's like these kids, and just much like me growing up, we didn't know that was possible, right? And over here in Waterloo, where ACEs is such a perpetuating occurrence, how many people grow up and end up going to the grave not knowing that it's possible, right?
Yeah, most people, right?
Most people, right?
Most people.
So what is your response to these kids? How can you, as future governor, give a voice to these kids who don't know the value, who don't yet know the value of gaining access to these mental health services, whether you're removing barriers,
right,
whether you're having more representation of people's values and their access to mental health services? What is your direct response to that statement of I don't know?
You know, a lot of that's interesting. When I was in the school, and I have to use this example, this is like the closest bridge for me. When I talk about behavior management in our school districts, oftentimes I had to remind our educators and administrators that a student demonstrating antisocial behavior in a school sometimes means that's the only safe place for them to express how they feel about something. At home,
yeah,
to display that behavior might mean abuse.
Yeah.
Right? It might mean you get hit, you get told to leave.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly what makes him say that I will get judged for oversharing.
Right?
Right.
So if in our classroom, that's a safe space, I get to be myself, and sometimes that's not my best self, right? But it's my real self in that moment.
Right.
Right? We have to have eyes to see that. That's a gain sometimes. That's a relationship. That's showing that you feel safe enough around me.
Yeah.
To display a behavior that may be how you're truly authentically feeling, even though it may not be socially acceptable in this moment or whatever we want to phrase it as, it's still you being your true self. And so when it comes to students utilizing that safe space to write down on paper or put over a track how they feel about a circumstance, we're providing a safe space for them, that comfortability.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's important because that's not for everybody, right? That's not for everything. My wife, that might be a canvas with paint.
Right.
That might be her safe space to express something and then tell you how she feels about it or why it looks like the way it looks.
Right.
But we can't take away those avenues. And so I would say when you talk about counselors, sometimes it's hard, man, because I think a counselor without a shared lived experience to you makes you feel as though it's just somebody asking you questions. Right. And that's hard because you got to get past that part of it. Some people search, like me, I search for anonymity in the counselor. I want somebody who never read an article that I was ever in whatsoever.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
No preconceived
notions. If I walk in and you say, hey, you're representing Ras Smith, I'm walking out of your office.
Wow.
Right? If you know who I am when I walk in, I'm out.
Nice.
I want no parts of that, right? But some people want that familiarity. Yeah. So having that ambiguity for me is important. Yeah. It's important. Because I struggle with that trust aspect of it, right? At what point, if I run for governor and I'm winning this race, at what point is the information we share in this conversation beneficial to you more so than it is in your practice, right? I have, right, some things that I'm working through when it comes to what leadership looks like from people and that interaction, right? Yeah. How much information is too much information if it's dangerous for you to use against me at some point when it's advantageous for you. Right. It's always my concern. Yeah. I think like a lot of people. And so for these young people, we're talking about them trusting in an institution that's unfamiliar. Trusting in something that that's faith. Yeah. We're asking them to do something that's different because most things in this society have not told them that they're valuable.
Especially when that institution is the ones that betrayed them from the very beginning.
Over and over again, right? Yeah. And so it's about, you have to be more than just a counselor. Counselors, like you said, have to be reflective. Maybe you got to be somebody who I'm familiar with. Maybe you need to go to, maybe our students should go more so to Bakari, which they do, right? They go to Bakari services where they see familiar faces asking questions about shared lived experiences. Because sometimes you just want to know that, dang, that was bogus, right? Like that was not normal, right? Like, no, it's not normal. It's not normal. It's not okay. Yeah. And so it's okay for you to feel some type of way about it. Right. Sometimes that's all people are asking is to be affirmed and that their experience was as wild as they thought.
Exposure to validation and other people telling the same story.
Telling the same story. Yeah. And a counselor that's lived that is never going to minimize. Yeah. Right? Or never going to glorify. Right. Right? And those are things that you always have to be mindful of because you can't minimize the experience. You don't want to seem like you're giddy glorifying the experience. Like you just want to be told a good story as a counselor, like so many people sometimes do. And so those are things that we have to be mindful of because that's radical. Being radically inclusive means we're being mindful of those things. Absolutely. And developing a team that every time, right, this is for you, right? This is a perfect client for you to chat with, because you know this. Have that conversation about your experiences. Relationships matter more so than anything else. Before I care about what you have to say, I have to care about who you are.
Absolutely. Wow. So you believe that preventative measures in the public school systems are the first step to answering the question of like, how do we get the young kids just to start thinking about mental health services?
100%.
Wow.
100%. Early intervention in our school setting, I think, is the only way that we can address the mass trauma that we've seen taking place in our communities, in our state, in our country. Early intervention matters.
Yeah.
And so I don't know any other entity, right, besides our failing childcare system nationally, in which we see the volume of individuals to make the impact I think is necessary for a healthy, thriving community going forward.
Wow. Well, I think that about does it. I think that is the overall time we have for today. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. This has been a wonderful conversation. I am sending you nothing but good vibes within this upcoming year when it comes to your campaign, and I truly believe in everything that you're standing for, because you're standing for not only like Black Americans but all of Iowa. Right, especially with this mental health approach, I might be biased. I'm becoming a therapist, right? Obviously, I'm biased, but I believe that is like the one common ground that affects everything, or is affected by everything, rather.
Everything, exactly. Hurt people. So let's do something about the hurting people, man.
Right.
Thanks for making the time, bro. I appreciate you.
Thank you for coming.
Always a pleasure, man.
Have a wonderful night.
You
Take
too.
care.
Thank you.